Attica's hidden tunnel, how 7 inmates almost exposed the system. The Jackhammer stopped at 2:17 a.m. That's when Officer Thomas Brennan knew something was wrong. Stay with this story. What those 7 inmates were building beneath Attica would have changed everything about the uprising that followed. Attica Correctional Facility, Western New York, September 8, 1971. 5 days before the most infamous prison riot in American history. Brennan had worked the night shift for 11 years. He knew the sounds of D-block, the pipes, the ventilation, the normal rhythm of silence. A jackhammer wasn't normal. He grabbed his flashlight and headed for the industrial wing. The construction crew had been repairing the old tunnels beneath D-block for 3 weeks. Legitimate work. Approved by the warden. Daytime hours only. But Brennan heard it clearly. Mechanical percussion. Underground. At 2:17 in the morning, he reached the construction access point. The metal door was supposed to be locked after 6 p.m. It hung open. Brennan radioed for backup and went down the stairs. The tunnel was narrow, brick-lined, built in 1931 when Attica first opened. It connected the old cell blocks to the powerhouse. The jackhammer's sound grew louder, then stopped. Brennan's flashlight caught movement ahead. Shadows against the brick. This is Officer Brennan. Identify yourself. Silence. He moved forward. 20 feet. 30. The tunnel split into 3 passages. The construction work was supposed to be in the right passage. Foundation repair. But fresh debris came from the left tunnel. The one that dead-ended at the outer wall. Brennan turned left. What he found shouldn't have been possible. The wall at the end of the tunnel had been breached. Not by construction equipment. By hand tools. Smuggled materials. Months of secret work. A hole approximately 3 feet in diameter. Leading outward. Beyond it, Brennan could see dirt. Support beams. A crude but functional tunnel extending into darkness. Someone had been digging toward the perimeter fence. For months, under the cover of legitimate construction, Brennan backed up and radioed the control room. We have an unauthorized excavation in the D-block tunnels. Possible escape route. I need. A sound behind him. Turned. 7 men stood in the tunnel, blocking his exit. Not in prison uniforms. In construction coveralls. Brennan recognized one of them. Samuel Melville. Serving 18 years for bombing. Known radical. Brilliant engineer. You weren't supposed to find this yet, Melville said quietly. Brennan's hand moved to his radio. Don't, another inmate said. Herbert Blyden. Life sentence. Former Black Panther organizer. You're making a mistake, Brennan said. No, Melville replied. We're making a point. They didn't attack him. They just stood there. 7 inmates in stolen coveralls. Between Brennan and the exit. This tunnel leads outside the fence, Brennan said. You think nobody's going to notice? We want them to notice, Blyden said. That's the whole point. Brennan didn't understand. We've been building this for 7 months, Melville explained. Right under your feet. Using your own construction crew as cover. We have documentation. Photographs. Detailed records of every security failure that made this possible. Why tell me this? Because tomorrow morning, we're telling everyone. Guards. Warden. Media. This tunnel proves the system is broken. Proves this facility is unsafe. Proves inmates can do whatever they want if the administration is incompetent enough. Brennan felt his stomach drop. You're not escaping. We're exposing, Blyden said. There's a difference. And if I report this now? You can try, Melville said. But we've already documented everything. The tunnel exists. That's not going to change. The question is whether you want to be the officer who discovered it or the officer who tried to cover it up. Brennan looked at the 7 men. At the tunnel behind them. At the hole in the wall. He made a decision he'd regret for the rest of his life. I need to see your documentation. They led him deeper into the tunnel system. Past the breach. Into the hand-dug passage beyond. It was sophisticated. Shored up with stolen lumber. Ventilated with improvised ductwork. Lit by battery-powered work lights. Melville showed him photographs. Dozens of them. Documenting the construction process. Time stamped. We started in February, Melville said. Right after the administration announced the tunnel repairs. We convinced them to hire inmates for the work crew. Security clearance. Tool access. Everything legitimate. How did nobody notice? Because nobody was looking. Your administration approved everything. Signed off on material requisitions. Provided supervision that was barely supervision at all. Blyden handed Brennan a folder. This is our report. 17 pages. Every security failure. Every protocol violation. Every moment your staff looked the other way. Brennan opened the folder. The first page was a timeline. February through September. Every step of the tunnel construction. Every stolen tool. Every forged signature. The second page was worse. A list of officers who'd been paid off. Not with money. With promises. Favors. Threats to families outside. 7 names. Brennan recognized 4 of them. This is blackmail, he said. This is leverage, Melville corrected. We're not escaping. We're negotiating. Tomorrow morning, this goes public. Unless the administration agrees to our demands. What demands? Better conditions. Real oversight. Independent investigation of abuses. The things we've been asking for and getting ignored. Brennan looked at the tunnel. At the documentation. At the 7 men who'd built an escape route they had no intention of using. They're never going to negotiate with you, he said. Then the tunnel becomes news. National news. And Attica becomes a symbol of everything wrong with American corrections. Brennan's radio crackled. Control room checking in. He ignored it. You've made your point, he said. But this ends badly. No matter what you think you've accomplished. Melville smiled sadly. It already ended badly, officer. We're just making sure everyone sees why. Brennan climbed back up to D Block at 3:45 a.m. He went straight to the deputy warden's office. He explained everything. The tunnel. The documentation. The 7 inmates. The demands. Deputy Warden Carl File listened without interrupting. When Brennan finished, File leaned back in his chair. You're certain about what you saw? Yes, sir. And they claim this has been ongoing since February? Yes, sir. File picked up his phone. Brennan assumed he was calling the warden. Instead, File called maintenance. I need the D-block tunnel access sealed. Immediately. Welded shut. Before morning count. Brennan's blood went cold. Sir, we need to investigate. We need to contain a security breach. Nothing more. But the inmates have documentation. Which proves nothing if the tunnel doesn't exist. Brennan understood then. File wasn't going to address the security failures. He was going to bury them. Literally. Sir, 7 inmates know about this. They're planning to. 7 inmates who were in an unauthorized area will be transferred to isolation. Standard procedure for rule violations. They'll talk. The media. We'll hear about 7 troublemakers trying to escape. Which we prevented. Which makes us look competent, not incompetent. Brennan felt the room spin. This is wrong. This is crisis management, officer. And if you want to keep your job, you'll file a report stating you discovered an unauthorized excavation that was immediately secured. Nothing about demands. Nothing about documentation. Nothing about negotiation. And if I don't? File's expression hardened. Then you're the officer who allowed 7 inmates unsupervised access to construction equipment for 7 months. Which makes you either corrupt or incompetent. Choose. Brennan left the office at 4:30 a.m. By 6 a.m., the tunnel entrance was sealed. By 8 a.m., the 7 inmates were in isolation. By noon, the documentation had disappeared. But when they checked the logs for inmate complaints over the previous 6 months, everything changed. Because the 7 inmates weren't acting alone. They were representing 42 others. Who were planning something much bigger than a tunnel. The isolation cells were supposed to hold them for 72 hours. The 7 inmates lasted 19. Then the entire system broke. September 9, 1971. 8:45 a.m. Morning count. Officer William Quinn walked through A block with his clipboard. Standard procedure. Routine check. He noticed something immediately. The inmates weren't moving toward the mess hall. They were standing at their cell doors. Watching him. Quinn radioed control. A block count complete. But the men aren't responding to movement orders. Repeat that. They're not moving. They're just standing there. Control didn't respond for 7 seconds. Then, proceed to B block. Continue count. Quinn moved to the next cell block. Same thing. Inmates at their doors. Silent. Waiting. Not hostile. Not violent. Organized. By 9:15 a.m., Quinn reached D block. The block where the tunnel had been sealed 3 days earlier. The inmates here weren't silent. They were chanting. One word. Over and over. Melville. 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 Quinn's hand moved to his radio. Before he could speak, the cell doors opened. Not one. Not two. All of them. Simultaneously. Someone had accessed the master control system. Electronic locks throughout D block released at once. 200 inmates poured into the corridor. Quinn ran. He made it 15 feet before they caught him. Not to hurt him. To hold him. A dozen hands grabbed his arms, his uniform, his radio. We don't want violence, someone said. Herbert Blyden. One of the 7 from the tunnel. Then let me go. We will. After you deliver a message. Quinn was dragged to the corridor intersection. Other officers were being rounded up. Not beaten. Contained. Samuel Melville stood in the center of the corridor. Freed from isolation by whoever had opened the doors. 3 days ago, Melville announced loudly, we showed Officer Brennan proof of systemic failures. We offered documentation. We asked for dialogue. The inmates around him went quiet. The administration's response was to seal evidence and isolate witnesses. They chose cover-up over correction. Quinn saw other inmates gathering. Hundreds now. From every block. This wasn't spontaneous. This was coordinated. So now we're taking a different approach, Melville continued. We're holding this facility. Peacefully. Until our demands are heard. An inmate handed Melville a megaphone. All officers will be treated humanely. No violence unless violence is brought against us. We want negotiation. We want reform. We want what was denied when we tried to do this quietly. Quinn felt his radio being removed from his belt. Take him to the yard, Blyden ordered. With the others. By 10:30 a.m., over 40 officers were held in the recreation yard. Unharmed. Surrounded by 1,200 inmates who'd taken control of 4 cell blocks. Deputy Warden File watched from the administration building through binoculars. Warden Vincent Mancusi stood beside him. How many? Mancusi asked. 43 officers. Maybe more. How did this happen? File didn't answer immediately, because he knew exactly how it happened. The 7 inmates in isolation weren't the problem. They were the warning. The inmates are demanding negotiation, File said carefully. Same as before. Before. File hesitated, then explained about the tunnel, the documentation, the demands that had been dismissed. Mancusi's face went white. You sealed evidence of a security breach without informing me? I was managing a crisis. You created one. In the yard, the inmates were organizing, setting up committees, establishing order. This wasn't chaos. This was government. Mancusi grabbed the phone. Get me the state police. And the governor's office. Sir, if we bring in outside force. We've already lost control. Now we're going to get it back. Officer Thomas Brennan watched from inside D block. He'd been on duty when the doors opened. Captured immediately. But unlike the others, he'd been separated. Brought to a small room in the education building. Melville sat across from him. You tried to help, Melville said. I remember that. I reported what I saw. And File buried it. Just like we predicted he would. Brennan looked at the walls. Someone had posted sheets of paper. The documentation from the tunnel. The 17-page report. The list of officers. You kept copies, Brennan said. Of course we did. We knew they'd destroy the originals. Then why not release them? Why take hostages? Melville leaned forward. Because documents can be ignored, discredited, called forgeries. But 1,200 inmates holding a prison? That's a news story. That's national attention. That forces accountability. People are going to die. People are already dying. Slowly. In cells. From neglect and abuse. We're just making it visible. Brennan heard shouting outside. More officers being brought in. How long can you hold this? He asked. As long as it takes for someone to listen. The state won't negotiate with you. Then the state will storm the facility. And the whole world will watch prisoners die defending demands for basic human rights. Brennan saw the calculation in Melville's eyes. You wanted this, Brennan said quietly. The tunnel was never about escape. It was bait. You wanted them to dismiss you. To prove they wouldn't negotiate. Melville didn't deny it. You used that tunnel to justify this takeover. We used that tunnel to expose a truth. The administration would rather cover up failures than fix them. And now everyone's going to see what happens when you ignore desperate people. By noon, news helicopters circled overhead. By 2 p.m., state police had surrounded the facility. By 4 p.m., the governor's office issued a statement. No negotiation with rioters. Inside the yard, the inmates organized shifts. Medical care for officers. Food distribution. Security patrols to prevent violence. They were trying to prove they could govern themselves better than the system that held them. But Officer William Quinn had been injured during the initial takeover. Hit in the head when he ran. Accident or attack, nobody agreed. He was in the prison hospital. Unconscious. The inmates allowed medical staff to treat him. But his condition was deteriorating. By evening, the doctors said he needed to be transferred to a real hospital. The inmates debated. If they released Quinn, they lost leverage. If Quinn died, they lost any claim to peaceful intent. Melville argued for release. Others disagreed. Wanted guarantees first. The vote was close. They decided to wait. That was the second mistake. September 10th, morning. Quinn's condition worsened overnight. The inmates agreed to release him. But the transfer took hours to arrange. Security protocols. Negotiations about how to safely move him. By the time Quinn reached the hospital, it was too late. He never regained consciousness. When news reached the yard that an officer had died, everything shifted. This was no longer a protest. It was a murder case. The state police commissioner made an announcement. The inmates had 48 hours to surrender. After that, force would be used. Inside the yard, the inmates knew what that meant. But they also knew surrender meant collective punishment. Isolation. Beatings. Years added to sentences. They'd crossed a line. Going back wasn't safe either. Officer Brennan was released on September 11th. Part of a small group let go as a gesture of good faith. He walked out through the gates into media chaos. Reporters shouting questions about conditions inside. State officials demanding information about inmate plans. Brennan stood in the parking lot, shaking. Someone handed him coffee he didn't drink. Deputy Warden File approached. What did they tell you? They're scared, Brennan said. They know this ends badly. Did they mention the tunnel? Brennan looked at him. The tunnel you sealed? The evidence you destroyed? That tunnel. Officer. They have copies of everything. The documentation. The photographs. The list of officers you were protecting. File's expression hardened. Where? Inside. Posted in the education building. They're using it as proof the administration can't be trusted. That's classified. It's evidence of criminal negligence. And when the state goes in there, it's going to become public record. File walked away without responding. Brennan stood in the parking lot until dark. Watching helicopters circle. Watching state police gather. Knowing what came next. September 13th, 9:46 a.m. State police and National Guard units stormed Attica. Tear gas. Gunfire. Chaos. The retaking lasted 15 minutes. When it ended, 39 people were dead. 29 inmates. 10 hostages. Almost all killed by state forces, not prisoners. The yard was littered with bodies. The cells were destroyed. And in the education building, pinned to the walls, the 17-page report about the tunnel remained. Investigators found it 3 hours after the assault, photographed it, cataloged it, then quietly removed it from official evidence. Because it raised questions nobody wanted to answer. About why the administration had ignored warnings. About why security failures had been covered up instead of corrected. About whether 7 inmates with a tunnel and a report could have prevented everything if someone had just listened. Deputy Warden File resigned 6 weeks later. Officer Thomas Brennan transferred to a different facility. He never worked nights again. The tunnel beneath D Block was filled with concrete. The official report called it an escape attempt. The documentation was never mentioned. And the families of 39 dead were told their loved ones died in a riot. Not a failure. End of Chapter 2. The final chapter reveals what was really in that 17-page report, and why it's still classified 50 years later. The report surfaced again in 1974. Not from official channels. From a lawyer's filing cabinet in Buffalo. Attorney Elizabeth Fink was representing inmates in civil suits against New York State. Wrongful death. Excessive force. Civil rights violations. She'd heard rumors about documentation. About a tunnel. About warnings ignored. Then a manila envelope appeared at her office. No return address. Postmarked from Rochester. Inside were photocopies. 17 pages. Just like Brennan had described. But with an additional section he'd never seen. The part that explained why 7 inmates built a tunnel they never intended to use. The report wasn't about escape. It was about leverage. Samuel Melville and Herbert Blyden had spent months documenting systemic failures at Attica. Guard brutality. Medical neglect. Censored mail. Arbitrary punishments. Standard complaints. Easily dismissed. So they needed proof the administration was incompetent. The tunnel provided that proof. But the report contained something more dangerous than security failures. Financial records. Someone inside Attica's administration had been embezzling for years. Construction contracts awarded to shell companies. Supply purchases at inflated prices. Equipment that was ordered but never delivered. The tunnel construction had given the inmates access to administrative records they shouldn't have seen. Invoices. Purchase orders. Approved expenditures. They documented everything. The report's final section listed names. Dollar amounts. Years of systematic theft. 3 members of senior staff. 2 state contract officers. 1 member of the State Corrections Board. Millions of dollars. Spread across a decade. The tunnel wasn't just about proving the prison was unsafe. It was about proving the people running it were criminals. Elizabeth Fink read the report 3 times. Then called the only person she trusted to verify it. Thomas Brennan. He'd left corrections. Moved to Vermont. Started over. When she reached him by phone, he was silent for a long time. I only saw the first 12 pages, he finally said. The security failures. The paid-off guards. I didn't know about the financial crimes. Did Melville tell you? He said the administration would rather cover up than correct. I thought he meant the tunnel. But he meant everything. Why didn't this come out during the investigation? Brennan's laugh was bitter. Because the state's investigation was about justifying the assault. Not about examining what caused it. These financial records, can you verify them? I can verify the names. The contracts. Whether the numbers match. He paused. You'd need an accountant. And subpoena power. Fink had neither. But she had something else. A dead officer's widow who wanted answers. William Quinn's wife, Nancy, had been told her husband died during a riot. Killed by inmates. Tragic. Unavoidable. But she'd never believed the official story. Quinn had been a good officer. Respected by inmates. Why would they target him? When Fink showed her the report, Nancy understood. They didn't target him, she said quietly. He was in the wrong place when everything broke. The state wants people to think the inmates were violent animals, Fink explained. But this report shows they were trying to expose corruption. and the administration shut them down. So my husband died because someone was stealing money? Your husband died because the administration chose cover-up over reform. The inmates got desperate. And desperate people make desperate choices. Nancy Quinn stared at the 17 pages. Who else knows about this? Whoever sent it to me. Whoever kept it hidden for 3 years. Why send it now? That was the question Fink couldn't answer. Until the second envelope arrived. 2 weeks later. Another manila envelope. Same postmark. This one contained a typed letter. No signature. It explained everything. The letter was from someone who'd worked in the warden's office in 1971. Someone who'd watched the tunnel discovery get buried. Who'd seen the report confiscated. Someone who'd kept a copy. The letter said, I was ordered to destroy all evidence of the inmates' documentation. I was told it was classified security information. I complied publicly but kept copies privately because I knew the truth would matter someday. The 7 inmates who built that tunnel were trying to save lives. They believed if they could prove the system was broken, someone would fix it before violence became necessary. They were wrong. The administration didn't care about broken systems. They cared about broken revenue streams. The embezzlement documented in that report was real. I verified it myself. But exposing it would have meant investigations, audits, criminal charges against people with power. So it was easier to call it a riot, to blame inmates, to justify force. 39 people died because telling the truth was politically expensive. The letter ended with a single line. I'm dying. Offensive. I don't have time for consequences anymore. Make sure this matters. Fink took the report to the New York Times. They investigated for 6 months. The story broke in March 1975. Front page. Above the fold. Hidden report shows Attica inmates tried to expose corruption before uprising. The financial records were verified. The embezzlement was real. 2 senior staff members were indicted. 1 fled to Canada. 1 took a plea deal. The state corrections board member resigned. The contracts were audited. $7 million in fraudulent expenditures. Over 9 years. Public outrage forced a new investigation into the Attica assault. But no criminal charges were ever filed against anyone involved in the retaking. The official position remained. The inmates rioted. The state responded appropriately. The report about the tunnel became a footnote. Acknowledged but minimized. Samuel Melville didn't survive the assault. He was killed in the yard on September 13, 1971. Shot multiple times by state police. Herbert Blyden survived. Barely. Served 20 more years. In 1991, he gave an interview to a documentary filmmaker. We knew building that tunnel was dangerous, Blyden said. We knew exposing the corruption would make powerful people angry. But we thought if we did everything right, documented everything, offered negotiation first, someone would listen. Why didn't they? Because listening would have meant admitting failure. And people in power don't admit failure. They create scapegoats. Do you regret it? Blyden was quiet for a long time. I regret that William Quinn died. I regret that 38 others died. I regret that violence became the only language anyone heard. But the tunnel? The tunnel was hope. We built it believing the system could be changed from inside. That proof of corruption would matter. That someone in authority would choose justice over convenience. And when that didn't happen, we learned that hope isn't enough. That's what Attica taught everyone. Hope without power is just waiting to be crushed. The tunnel beneath D Block remained sealed until Attica was renovated in 2001. During demolition, workers rediscovered it. The passage was more extensive than anyone had known. Not just toward the perimeter fence. Also toward the administration building. Toward the warden's office. Toward the financial records room. The inmates hadn't been building an escape route. They'd been building an investigation. Direct access to the documents they needed to prove the embezzlement. The tunnel was never meant to get them out. It was meant to get the truth out. Elizabeth Fink continued representing Attica survivors until her death in 2008. She won settlements for dozens of families. Millions in damages. But she never stopped pushing for the full report to be declassified. Portions remain sealed. Even now. Officially, ongoing security concerns. Unofficially, names that were never indicted. Connections that were never investigated. Thomas Brennan died in 2019. His obituary mentioned he'd worked at Attica. It didn't mention the tunnel. It didn't mention the warning he'd tried to deliver. It didn't mention that he'd spent 48 years wondering if he could have stopped everything by refusing files orders. His family found notebooks after he died. Journals. Detailed accounts of September 1971. Everything he'd seen. Everything he'd been told to forget. They donated them to a university archive. Researchers are still going through them. In 2021, on the 50th anniversary of the uprising, New York State issued an apology. For the excessive force. For the deaths. For the cover-up. The governor acknowledged that many inmates had been trying to address legitimate grievances. That the state's response had been disproportionate and tragic. The word riot was replaced with uprising in official documentation. A memorial was planned. But the financial crimes detailed in the 17-page report were never part of the apology. That section remains classified. Because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging something more uncomfortable than violence. That the system those inmates tried to expose is still operating. Different names. Different facilities. Same incentives. Same indifference to warnings. The 7 inmates who built the tunnel believed documentation would matter. That proof would force accountability. They were half right. The proof existed. It was verified. It became public. But accountability required something more than evidence. It required people in power choosing justice over self-preservation. And 50 years later, that choice still hasn't been made. Attica taught us that desperate people will take desperate action when ignored. But it also taught us that exposing corruption isn't enough. That building tunnels, literal or metaphorical, to reach the truth only matters if someone on the other side is willing to look. 7 inmates spent months building proof of systemic failure. The system's response was to seal the evidence and storm the prison. 39 people died. Thousands more were traumatized. And the corruption they tried to expose continued. This could happen again. Because the conditions that created Attica, ignored warnings, covered up failures, desperate people with no legal recourse, still exist in corrections facilities across America. We remember the violence. We forget the tunnel. We memorialize the dead. We ignore what they died trying to say. That's not just a tragedy. That's a choice. And we keep making it. If this story shook you, the next one will be worse. Because the question isn't whether inmates will try to expose broken systems. It's whether anyone will listen before it's too late again.